Hi everyone, it's really good to see you. It's great to be here. It's an honor. Thank you to Amy, Pamela and her team for having me. And this has just been the most extraordinary set of conversations and talks I've heard. Hard act to follow.
Yes, I second that. Thanks everyone, it's lovely to be here. I'm honored to be here with Dr. Deborah Brosnan. And yeah, we're gonna have an interesting, I hope, conversation around science as a change maker of culture. Yeah, we kind of wanted to kick off this conversation with, a few years ago, Deborah, you were here and you were giving a TEDx talk about a plane crash you were involved in, and how your connection to nature actually was very instrumental in that experience. And I was curious to know, how has that experience shaped your life and your work since?
Yes, the first time I was here, in fact, was at the TEDx talk a few years ago. And I spoke then about what it was like to survive a 747 jetliner plane crash coming back from Southeast Asia to Los Angeles. And I was very lucky to survive, but it was a traumatic experience. And what got me through was sitting in a hotel room, filling the bathtub with water, putting my head under the water, and imagining myself as I had been 2 days before on a coral reef swimming with a sea turtle. And then going back to nature as soon as I got home. And nature for me was the healing force that really reconnected me with the world, made sense of a lot of things. And then from there, I thought, nature has been my healer and my teacher throughout my life. To a volcanic eruption as a kid, growing up in the tide pools of Ireland. And to me, I know the power of nature and what it can do for people, and how if we're aligned with nature, we make a difference. And so after that TED Talk, I thought, it's not enough to be saying nature's important to us personally, but how do we take that importance? How do we scale it, if you like, to other industries, to other groups of people, to other parts of the world? How do we bring nature and aligning with nature into the business conversation, into the political conversation? So I made that my mission, and I'm still doing it. And,
yes. As president and founder of Deborah Brosnan and Associates, I know that's kind of what you're out in the world doing, and obviously nature was a catalyst for change in your own culture personally. And what ways do you feel that science can be a catalyst for cultural change, particularly in addressing environmental and climate issues?
I think science is powerful. And the doing of science and the knowledge that science creates can be extraordinary as a catalyst. I mean, science is a way of knowing, it's a way of discovery. It's really about learning. And as Dr. Sylvia Earle was saying earlier, the amount of knowledge we have compared to what we had 10, 15, 20 years ago is extraordinary, and it's accelerating. And what science does in this knowledge is that it can bring people together. And I want to give you an example, because I think that makes a difference. A few years ago, the Department of Interior called me up and said, we're having issues with the Florida Everglades. We're dealing with bird species that are endangered and going extinct, the seaside sparrow. And if we manage the sparrow, we may put another species of bird extinct. We've got to restore water flows, but if we restore water flows, we may drown sparrow habitat. And there were many different groups all engaged in trying to restore the habitat, but many of them were also suing each other because they had different interests, from agriculture to indigenous communities. And I said, okay, what should we do? And then I thought, I'm going to get a group of scientists who really know these ecosystems, but are not involved, to come together and be almost a main panel. And then to reach out to all of these groups that are really engaged and are stakeholders, and invite them to come to the table and present their science and talk about what they're seeing. And it was the most powerful experience, because prior to that, I called up everybody to invite them, and each group felt that they had knowledge to bring and that they were not being heard. And so getting everybody, if you like, around the table and giving every group, the industry group, the native group, the environmental groups, the other scientific groups, the agencies, a chance to bring what they knew to the table, and almost have this panel of scientists to listen, and then say, okay, this is what we're hearing, and here is where we hear the knowledge, and here is where we hear the uncertainty, and here's where we hear we're not sure of the science. And we heard a lot about uncertainty, but we're not sure. and here's where we think it might go. Well, all of a sudden, the people who were opposed to each other and suing each other started to talk about solutions in the sense of, well, if we need this much flow, but we also need to provide water, how about if we did it in this particular way? And science can transform meetings and cultures, just bringing people together and getting around the science gets us from our positions to think wider. And I think we need to do more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Which leads really nicely into this other question I have around, what is the role of science in finding the common ground? And it sounds like that's a really potent example of that.
Yeah, I think so. And I think we have other places that science can go to. And this is it's something I feel very strongly about. And it's also part of my mission is I see in the finance and the business community a lot of discussion about the importance of science and about the importance of nature and aligning with nature. And then I see when the decisions are made and people go into the boardrooms or the rooms, we say, check your ego at the door. Well, a lot of them check nature at the door. Yeah. And they go in and they talk about solutions on return on investment and then come back out and all go to a beautiful spot in nature. And we need to change that underlying assumption because there are ways that nature-based solutions in particular, that engaging with the environment can actually be an important part of the decision making. We saw earlier about the coastal erosion, the coastal problems. So we know nature-based solutions are the original technology. People for thousands of years have used nature as a technology for protecting our coastlines, for food, for fisheries, for spiritual reasons, but they are the original technology. We now understand an awful lot more about how nature works and how nature protects us. That protection provides today a return on investment for people who are building by the coastline, for people who are building their forests. Understanding nature allows us to say we don't need to build a seawall. We don't need to destroy our dunes. We can use our mangroves in order to manage flooding, but to purify our water while also giving ourselves fisheries. And this is not just a conservation by any other name. This literally is protecting our ecosystems so we get the value that ecosystems have always brought to us, and then creating a greater harmony with them. And now we can measure that. So can you imagine in a boardroom? Don't imagine it. We know that we can make it happen. Where that discussion is there. If we involve nature, if we restore a wetland, what does this do? Well, reduces your costs. It increases the value of the property. It gives you a greater return on investment. And it is also the right thing to do. So what better outcomes?
Yeah. And, we were discussing earlier today just the importance of, a lot of these decisions are made without scientists at the table necessarily, and how that is definitely a shift that you would certainly like to see.
Yeah.
Having those voices at the table and really defending their findings.
And I think you're right there about not just having scientists at the table, because often they're not. They're sort of in the other room. Yeah. But the idea of a new role for scientists, which is taking those findings and bringing them into these rooms. As we heard earlier, and I think this is really important, we have to be willing to sit down with people that don't agree with us, that have different priorities, and respect that those priorities are valuable to them, but equally so are ours, and find a way to make space for those priorities and come to a better solution. But the role for scientists, one that we haven't really seen very much, is to be the voice at that table, is to be the advocate for the findings, is to be the person who can drive those outcomes. And in a lot of meetings I've been in where it's often, let's say, finance people or investors, it's rare to see a scientist.
Yeah.
Very, very rare.
Yeah.
So we have to change that. So any of you budding scientists out there or thinking about this, please get into this translational role of science, because the world needs that. It really does.
Yeah, at Mongabay, I know that's one of our big goals, is trying to bring more science, making it more accessible, more information accessible to more people. On the subject of common ground, cultural change, I recently read your recent article, Is Bipartisan Climate Policy Possible in the U.S.? where you argue that it already is a, climate action already is a bipartisan effort. And we're having a presidential election soon here in the U.S. How do we make climate change and environmental issues and biodiversity a priority under a potential second Trump administration?
Very, very interesting question. Yeah, I think it's the one we're all thinking about, and many of us were afraid to ask that question. You just did. So kudos to you for bringing it up. We are at a point where climate change is being portrayed as Republican versus Democrat, liberal versus conservative, and nothing could be further from the truth. Because let's first of all talk about the studies that have been done on the polls. 5 times more people in the US believe that climate change is real than don't. So 5-to-1 ratio. Of those, most of them have experienced the impacts of climate change and talk about it. The vast majority of Americans feel that more should be done about climate change. And this is across partisan lines. It doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat or liberal libertarian. The fact is, most Americans are concerned about climate change. Most Americans want to see something done about it.
Yeah.
What we're seeing, and which I think is a real shame, is that the media the mainstream media still tends to portray it as Republican says this, Democrat says that, climate change is really a partisan issue. And the other, you see, I would say the more seasoned politicians still come out and talk about climate as though it was a partisan issue and a vote getter. And I don't think it is anymore. I think we've moved away from there. I mean, we saw it after President Biden's State of the Union, where he pledged more money for green energy, and the Republican response was, rushing to green.
Yeah.
Well, not really. I mean, we've heard, we're already 25% there. So I think the first thing is we have to recognize that it is not a partisan issue. And what we can do is talk to people who we think may feel differently about climate change, because it strikes me as how often, if I'm sitting and I'm like, yes, I'm a scientist, and people ask about climate change, they'll ask me, but then they start to tell me what they've experienced. And the number of people that you meet that say, look, I've been living in this place for X number of years, and what I'm experiencing are these hot issues. Do you think that we will be okay?
Yeah.
And most of them ask, will we be okay? Yeah. And the point is, we will be okay if we start to do something together. Yeah. So we as individuals have to almost outshout the mainstream media and continue to get the message out that this is not a partisan issue, that our neighbours may vote differently, but they're experiencing what we are. They are concerned like we are, and they want solutions. So let's just work together, and we're going to have to take the media with us.
Yeah, at Mongabay, we're definitely trying to reshape that narrative and work with mainstream media.
And you're doing a great job on it. You really are bringing that forward. It's really important. It's
storytelling. Yeah. I think there's a few different sessions over the next few days on storytelling, and it's such an important one where we can come together around those experiences. In our final couple of minutes here, I did want to get your thoughts, Dr. Brosnan, on, and this is a little question, so, no pressure, but what is your vision for a sustainable future? And what are the steps you believe are essential to achieving this vision on a global scale?
My vision for a sustainable future is where we can get up in the morning, and our kids can get up in the morning and feel safe in this world. And feel safe again, that they will have clean water, that they will have nature, and they will have a future. And that, to me, is my vision for the future. What can we do about it? There's a lot we can do about it. For each of us, I'm a scientist. I have a particular way that I like to be in the world and what I bring to the world. But every one of you has something that you bring that will change the way people think, will change the way people act, because you yourselves will change how you act. And as each of us do that, and we start to tell our stories and what we do, it's a domino effect, and it starts to expand. So I think the first thing we can do is it's from the bottom up. It really is a driver. I am so excited when I meet young people, because for me, sustainability was nobody spoke about it. The oceans were too big to fail when I was a kid. But the generation coming up have gone through this Save Our Oceans save our planet, to we know what to do, let's get on with it. I think supporting the younger generation, supporting the ideas that are coming out, is really going to be taking us to a fantastic, sustainable future. So,
Thank you.
Thank you so much.